Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere quiet. Somewhere stone walls muffle the sound of your own breath and flickering candles throw long shadows across worn flagstones. You're arriving just as twilight spills down over the abbey's high walls, the sky outside fading to indigo. The air smells faintly of beeswax and barley, and tucked behind the chapel's cloistered walkway, a whir of steam rises from a low stone building, part barn, part sanctuary. You're not just visiting a medieval convent, you're here for the beer. Yes, the nuns brew it, and you're going to help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where are you listening from and what time is it right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a gravel path, the pebbles shifting underfoot. The convent is smaller than you expected, not one of the ornate cathedrals from textbooks, but a squat, workaday kind of place. Humble stone walls, wooden shutters latched against the evening breeze, and ivy climbing a bell tower that looks one strong gust away from collapsing. You pass under an archway and into the convent courtyard, where a woman in homespun gray greets you with a small, bemused smile. "You're late," she says, and gestures you inside. The stone corridor is cool, lined with bundles of dried herbs, fennel, thyme, and something sharper you can't place. The abbess, older and with laugh lines that suggest she's not quite as stern as she pretends, gives you a curt nod. Put your hands to use or go confess to idleness. Your hands end up on a wooden mash paddle stirring a thick, yeasty blend inside a steaming copper vat. The brewery smells surprisingly rich, like grain and fruit and cloves. You expected incense, but this is something else. Turns out, the nuns take their brewing seriously. By the flickering torchlight, you notice Sister Agatha testing the mash's consistency with practiced fingers. She mutters something about air temperature and seasonal shifts, and you realize this isn't guesswork. It's ritual, refined, historical. Historians still argue whether nuns had access to the same brewing knowledge as monks, but here it's clear the sisters are no amateurs. Their movements are deliberate, measured. There's math in every pour. You pause for a breath and glance around. In one corner, a wheel of cheese ages next to racks of drying herbs. In another, loaves of rye bread cool beside an enormous clay vessel. The nuns aren't just brewing beer. They're building a whole ecosystem. Nutritional, medicinal, spiritual. Drink, and do not faint. Sister Agnes says with a wink, handing you a small ceramic cup filled with warm, cloudy ale. It's sweet and tangy, with an herbal bite that surprises you. Hints of chamomile, maybe rosemary. It's earthy and alive. This isn't a luxury, it's survival. You probably won't survive this century, by the way. Not unless you stay hydrated, avoid plague, and trust the local brew to be cleaner than the river. Because fun fact, beer was often safer to drink than water in the medieval world. Boiling during the brewing process killed many waterborne pathogens. Monasteries, known for sanitation, had an edge in quality, but convents, they were quieter about it. Less known, less credit. Yet here you are, seeing firsthand how clean, controlled, and shockingly advanced the nuns' operation is. A bell rings. Vespers. Time to put the brewing tools down and head to the chapel for evening prayer. But as you leave, you glance back at the fermentation barrels, now sealed and tucked into the cool stone cellar. There's a reverence in how the nuns move around them, like the beer is not just food, not just drink, but something sacred. A liturgy in liquid form. You shuffle into a wooden pew. The chapel is dim, the prayers rise in whispered Latin, but all you can think about is that faint herbal aftertaste, still lingering on your tongue. You wonder what's in it. Wormwood maybe. Mugwort, something forgotten to modern palate. Fringe fact, mugwort was once a common ale additive, before hops took over the scene. Not because it tasted better, but because it had other properties. Lucid dreaming, anyone? One nun coughs softly beside you, but otherwise the chapel is You close your eyes, tired from the stirring and lifting and inhaling so much steam. Your arms ache, But you feel something else too, a sense of quiet competence, humming beneath the surface of this place. You're not here for some monastic tourism. You're in the engine room of medieval survival, and it's run by women who know how to craft more than just prayers. The abbess claps once. Everyone rises. You file out with the rest, your feet scuffing the flagstones. In the distance, a fox yips in the trees. You glance up at the stars. They seem brighter here, or maybe it's the beer talking. You wonder how long the nuns have been perfecting this particular batch. A week, a season, a century. The convent returns to quiet as doors shut, candles are snuffed, and night fully takes hold. But just beneath your feet, the yeast begins its slow, bubbling work in the barrels below. The brewing never really stops. You wake before the bell. There's something strange about early mornings in the convent. It's not just the quiet, though the silence is thick enough to chew on. It's the purposeful rustle of sandals against stone. The whisper of cloth as sisters pass like ghosts down the hallway. You roll off your straw mattress, limbs still aching from yesterday's stirring. The air is cold, and your breath hangs briefly in the candlelight. Somewhere outside, a rooster considers crowing and wisely decides against it. Today, you're not making beer. You're drinking it. Well, not like a party, more like breakfast. At first, it feels wildly wrong. There's a wooden bowl of porridge, a wedge of yesterday's black bread, and right beside it, a small ceramic tankard of ale. No mugs of hot tea, no splash of water, just beer. Dark, warm, and foamy. The abbess gives you a glance that says don't overthink it and blesses the meal. You sip. It's richer this time, smoother, less herbal, more malty. It tastes kind. In this convent, beer isn't indulgence, it's sustenance. It's called liquid bread for a reason. Historians still debate how much alcohol medieval people actually consumed daily, but monastic communities definitely didn't shy away from regular pints. For the sisters, the beer serves three sacred purposes: hydration, nutrition, and the gentle softening of life's edges. There's no refrigeration. Clean water is dicey. A pint of house-brewed ale at dawn just makes sense. You glance down the table. Not a single nun looks tipsy, just focused. Content. Fed. One younger sister, barely past her vows, notices your wary sip and smiles. "We do not fast from flavor," she says, quoting someone. Maybe the abbess, maybe a saint. Her eyes twinkle. Saint Bridget once prayed for a lake of beer in heaven. She's not kidding. There's an actual Irish poem that says just that. Saint Bridget of Kildare, a nun mind you, famously wished for an afterlife with flowing beer and friends to share it with. Can't say she's wrong. You help clear the table, returning tankards to the scullery, where Sister Elspeth scours them with a fistful of rosemary. It smells clean, almost modern, and you're told it's to keep the barrels from turning sour. You don't want to drink penance, she jokes, scrubbing hard. The monastery next door, yes, you can see it across the pasture, makes beer too. But already, whispers float in the kitchen that their latest batch went thin. The implication, they rushed it. They prayed too much and stirred too little. You chuckle, but only quietly, because here, brewing is no side task, it's a ministry. You begin to realize how deeply the daily schedule revolves around it. After breakfast, it's back to the brewhouse. Sister Agatha has you check on yesterday's wort. It's still warm, just starting to bubble. You lift the heavy lid and inhale, earthy, yeasty, with the faintest scent of overripe plums. A note in chalk above the barrels reads, "God watches while yeast works." Whether that's reassurance or passive aggression, you're not sure. "Do you know why we brew every week?" Agatha asks, handing you a dipper. You shake your head. Because people need it more than once. The guests, the pilgrims, the workers on feast days, and us. Not just for thirst, for energy, for the soul. You drink again. It's slightly different already. Less sweet, more acidic, still smooth. And yes, lest you forget, this beer isn't just for the nuns. Medieval convents often served travelers, sick peasants, nearby nobles in need of spiritual or physical healing. If you were lucky enough to stay in one, you were often handed a hot bowl of stew and a pint of whatever was brewing. It wasn't a party, it was life support. As you help label the casks, the abbess stops by with a parchment list. Inventory, distribution, ingredients to fetch from the garden. She pauses at your side and asks, "Would you rather live where no beer is brewed, or only drink a monk?" You stammer something about objectivity and fairness. She smirks, spoken like a monk. Quirky side fact: some convents actually had their own beer courts. Not a joke. They could levy fines for stolen beer, underpoured mugs, or serving beer on feast days when it was forbidden. Think of it as internal quality control with a gavel. You spend the rest of the morning measuring barley and hauling buckets of water from the well, clean, filtered through layers of gravel and divine judgment. By the time mid-prayer bell rings, your arms feel like ropes, your shirt sticks to your back, and you've sweated out any residual doubt about whether this counts as work. It does. After the prayers, you sit in the garden, gnawing on a hunk of dried apple and sipping what's now your third cup of ale. You're still alert, not drunk. The alcohol content is low, maybe 2%, but the flavor is deep, the kind you sip slowly without realizing how long you've been staring at bees landing in marjoram. The sun climbs. A cow moos in the distance. One of the sisters hums a psalm as she walks by. It's so serene, you almost miss it. An older nun slipping a vial of thick syrup into one of the beer barrels. You squint. She sees you, winks. "Medicinal," she says, "for Sister Mercy's cough." You don't ask what's in, but later, you notice that same barrel smells like honey, thyme, and something peppery. You take another sip. The aftertaste is warm, spicy. And just like that, you start to see beer here not just as drink, but as delivery system, a medicinal tonic, a moral compass in a mug. Sister Elspeth catches your eye and nods toward the barrels. "Better than the monks," she whispers, "but don't tell them." By now you know the rhythm. The brewing cycle hums beneath every day like a second heartbeat. One beat for the prayers, one for the pint. Today your job is simpler. Or so it seems. Gather herbs from the convent garden for the next infusion. "We'll do hops tomorrow," says Sister Agatha. "But today we brew the way our foremothers did." The herb garden is a sprawling, fragrant mess. Neat rows have long surrendered to nature's chaos. But the sisters still know exactly where to step. You follow, feet crunching gravel, dodging patches of feverfew and lemon balm. The air smells like an apothecary on vacation. She hands you a list: yarrow, sage, mugwort, marjoram, thyme. Each bundle you gather releases a scent that clings to your fingers. These aren't just flavorings. They're medicine, preservation, personality, and sometimes mischief. Historians still argue whether medieval herbal beer recipes were standardized or improvised. But one thing is clear: nuns were fearless with flavor, while monks stuck more rigidly to traditional formulas. The sisters experimented. Boldly. You pluck a fuzzy stem of horehound, sniff it, and immediately recoil. "Too much of that and it tastes like regret," says Agatha. "But a pinch, divine." You learn quickly that the nuns don't brew like monks. Where monks measure in weight and rules, the sisters measure in handfuls and instinct. 3 pinches and a prayer, Sister Elspeth jokes, as she tosses marjoram into a boiling pot. They call it Groot, the pre-hop herbal blend that once ruled the brewing world. Long before hops became the law of the land, beer was flavored with local herbs, each recipe a reflection of region, climate, and the brewer's mood. Some were calming, others were antiseptic, a few were recreational. Mugwort, for instance, has mild hallucinogenic properties. You glance at the drying rack and realize half the garden could qualify as a potion shelf. You help the nuns crush dried herbs with a stone mortar, and the scent rises warm and heady. There's something thrilling about it, like you're casting a spell rather than making a drink. They laugh when you ask for a recipe. "We don't write it down," Sister Agnes says, "because then someone could steal it." A fringe tidbit: some scholars believe nuns intentionally kept recipes oral to protect them from theft, or from church inspection. After all, a particularly potent batch could cross into dangerous, sinful territory. You sniff a purple flower that smells suspiciously like licorice and wonder what sins it might encourage. Still, this isn't chaos. There's structure in their freedom. The herbs are chosen for function, not just flavor. Thyme for antiseptic properties, sage for digestion, juniper for clarity, and rumor has it,
a touch of wild rosemary to ward off melancholia. As you stir, you realize this isn't beer the way modern minds think of beer. It's a brewed philosophy. It's something that won't just quench thirst, it'll shape your dreams. Literally, if there's enough mugwort involved, the kettle bubbles and hisses. You lean close and inhale, woody bitter, almost floral. You're lucky we didn't add valerian. Agatha says, that'll put you sleep faster than a sermon in Latin. They don't usually include it in daytime brews. Too strong. But they keep some for night batches, served to sick sisters who can't sleep. It's the medieval equivalent of melatonin. Suddenly, that whispery chant at midnight makes more sense. They weren't just tired. They were sedated by a pint of bedtime brew. One nun sidles up beside you with a bundle of violets and a wicked grin. Sometimes we brew a feast batch. Sweeter, spicier, gets the baronesses talking. Apparently the convent's beer has fans in noble households, some of whom request it by name during feast seasons. There's even a story about a duchess who claimed the beer cured her husband's melancholy, though whether that meant depression or something more anatomical is left to interpretation. You add your herbs to the kettle, the brew darkens, thickens. The aroma is intoxicating in its complexity. You can't stop smelling your own sleeve where some thyme juice splattered. It smells like medieval wellness wrapped in barley. This batch won't be as shelf-stable as hopped beer, and the sisters know it. It has to be drunk quickly within days. But that's fine. Everything here is made in a cycle. Nothing lingers. Even flavor is seasonal. Agatha taps the side of the copper pot and says, the monks will never taste this. You tilt your head. Why not? Because they stopped making Groot. Said it was too unruly, too unpredictable. She shrugs. Too feminine maybe. That's the thing no one says out loud. But everyone seems to understand. The monk's beer is logical, controlled, quantifiable. The nun's beer? Emotional, botanical, a bit witchy if you squint. That makes it powerful and dangerous. There's an unspoken rivalry between the two houses, visible only in side glances and half-jokes. The monks brew big batches for trade and record-keeping. The nuns brew small, complex batches for community, for healing, for fun. Guess whose tastes better? By sundown, you're labeling bottles with hand-drawn saints and wax seals. You see a crate marked Feast of Saint Hildegard. That name rings a bell. Hildegard of Bingen. Yes, the 12th century nun scientist who wrote about hops' preservative powers. She's one of the first people to describe how hops could help beer last longer. A nun, not a monk. You feel like that deserves more attention. The abbess rings the final bell. You cap the last bottle, hands smelling like sage and steam. You're tired, but in that satisfied way that makes your shoulders slump and your brain soften. You feel warm, maybe from the brewing room, maybe from the 2 small cups you sipped while no one was looking. You sit beneath a tree in the fading light. The last bird chirps once. Then silence falls. You close your eyes and let the smells of mugwort and marjoram settle into your thoughts. Tomorrow, hops. But tonight you dream in herb.
You're woken by the smell of smoke and steam. The sun hasn't fully risen, but the brewhouse is already alive. Wooden doors propped open to let in the morning chill, and sisters moving like clockwork. Today's brew is different, not the Groot of yesterday's herbal dreams, but something more robust, more structured. You're about to see the art of brewing meet the muscle of history. And you're carrying a cask. It's heavier than it looks. Your fingers slip slightly as you haul it across the courtyard, feet crunching in the gravel, knees trembling a little under the weight. Sister Agatha walks ahead, perfectly balanced with a full barrel perched on her shoulder like a medieval beer goddess. As you follow her, you notice something odd, an entire row of stacked casks, each marked not with the convent seal, but the seal of a nearby noble family. They'll collect them next week, Agatha explains. We brew what they like. and they pay well in wax and salt. You pause, cock an eyebrow. So you're catering? She snorts. We were alewives before we were nuns. Now that gets your attention. Alewife. You've heard the term women who brewed beer in their homes, sold it from their doorsteps, sometimes wore tall hats, so people could spot them in the market crowd. Before breweries became big business, most beer was made by women, and in many towns it was expected that the wife would brew for the household. Historians still argue whether alewives were viewed as respectable or suspicious, but in this convent they wear their brewing lineage like a badge of honor. You glance over at Sister Elspeth. So the nuns stole the alewife look. No, she corrects. The alewives stole it from the sisters. Bold claim, but she has the swagger to back it up. You help lift another cask into the shade. And as you do, a small cat darts out from beneath the rack and climbs onto one of the barrels. The sisters call her Hops, and she's basically the brew guardian. She chases mice, watches fermentation, and occasionally swipes at your tunic when you forget to feed her. Fun side fact. Some believe the image of alewives with cats, cauldrons, and tall hats helped fuel later witch stereotypes. You stare at Hop. Yeah, she does have that judgmental, I know your sins look. The brewing resumes, this time on a grander scale. The sisters are preparing what they call Pilgrim's Ale, a heartier brew meant for travel. Stronger, smoother, longer shelf life. You grind malted barley by hand, the husks scratching your palms. The grain smells warm, toasty, familiar. This brew skips the herbs. Instead they use more hops, which you'll hear more about tomorrow. Today is about labor, repetition, and power. The mash is thicker, the stirring more strenuous. You're sweating again within minutes, forehead damp, shirt clinging to your back. The mash paddle has a name etched into it, Sister Skolastaka, 3082. You wonder if she had biceps like rope. While you stir, Sister Agnes tells a story about the time their beer was mistaken for the monks, sold for twice the price. She laughs. They never forgave us. She's not exaggerating. In towns where both monasteries and convents brewed, their beers competed. Monks had more money, more land, more access to trade, but nuns had creativity, community trust, and crucially an edge in flavor. They always focus on volume, Agatha says. We focus on taste, and word spread. Noble families began requesting beer directly from convents. Pilgrims sought out nun-brewed pints for long journeys. Some even left donations specifically earmarked for brewing supplies, which meant more barley, better equipment, more nuns trained in the sacred science of fermentation. And yes, science. One young novice, Sister Theodora, takes you aside to show a diagram she drew of their fermentation room. It's detailed, annotated. She's tracking temperatures and fermentation times like a proto-brewer scientist, and she's only 19. I want to know what the yeast wants, she says. You blink. What it wants? Yeast is like a choir, she explained. You need the right harmony of heat, sugar, and time, otherwise they stop singing. You stare at her. That may be the most poetic yeast metaphor you've ever heard. Fringe tidbit. Some brewing records found in nunneries contain surprisingly sophisticated notes, fermentation temperatures, ideal barrel conditions, even seasonal brew variations. It wasn't just guesswork, it was a craft, and one crafted by women, quietly, consistently, in a world where monks got all the credit. You help bottle the batch, hands now stained with wort and hops resin. It smells pungent and earthy. You'll remember this scent for weeks, maybe long. Later in the cool of the chapel, you spot a stained glass window, depicting a nun with a bundle of barley and a mug. At first it feels like a joke, but it isn't. It's a quiet nod to Sister Walpurga, who according to convent legend, once stopped a plague by distributing specially brewed ale. Historians still debate whether the plague truly vanished, or if she just knocked everyone out for 3 days. The abbess rings the evening bell. You help set a table for supper, where yes, another tankard of beer awaits. This one lighter, crisper. It tastes like roasted bread crust and gentle bubbles. Elspeth toasts with you. To the sisters she says. To the alewives you reply. Hops the cat jumps onto the table, stares at your mug, and blinks slowly, judging, always judging. By now, you don't even blink when beer appears at breakfast. You sit at the long wooden table, spooning pottage into your mouth, while morning light filters through wavy glass. Beside your bowl, as usual, is a mug of freshly poured ale, slightly fizzy nutty on the tongue, and warm from the kitchen hearth. You sip without thinking. It's become as natural as breathing, only this time it tastes different. Fuller, deeper, like they've cracked some kind of secret. You glance around the table. The sisters sip their mugs with quiet satisfaction, the kind that says, yes, this is the good batch. Sister Agatha sees your expression and nods. That's the feast of Saint Zita brew. Stronger malt, more fermentation, bit of dried fig. You raise your eyebrows. You're allowed to make stronger beer. She smirks. Only of it's a feast, or penance, or fasting, or winter, or a visiting bishop, or if someone's about to die. So yes, turns out, the loopholes are endless. You're learning that in the medieval convent, beer doesn't follow modern rules. It doesn't come in standardized cans. It isn't 5% ABV across the board. It changes with the season, the mood, and the menu. And sometimes, it changes based on how long Sister Agnes forgets the lid was left open. Historians still argue whether nuns brewed for true commercial sale, or just self-sustainment. But either way, beer was a regular and sacred part of the daily cycle. And yes, that includes Lent. You blink. You drank beer during Lent? Agatha shrugs. Of course. It's not chewing. And so you learn about liquid fasting, a tradition in which solid food is avoided, but beer is totally fine, especially the rich, bready kind. The nuns would often up the grain-to-water ratio during fasting seasons, creating a thick, porridge-like ale called Doppelbock in later centuries. You don't just sip this, you practically chew it. The abbess enters, holding a clay mug as wide as your palm. Drink and offer thanks, she says, setting it down beside your plate. It's darker than the others, smells of raisins and toasted nuts. You sip. It's nearly a meal on its own, thick, dense, somehow still smooth. Liquid bread, Elspeth says, joining you. Fasting, but with flavor. There's a whisper around the table, rumors of a monk who tried to one-up the nuns by brewing an even stronger Lenten ale. He got too enthusiastic with the barley. The beer fermented into a dense, bitter sludge. In an effort to prove piety, he drank the whole barrel himself. He didn't wake up for 2 days. Whether true or not, you enjoy the story. By midday, you're helping to prepare more of the Lenten brew. The nuns call it gray ale, less for its color and more for the season it honors. You grind roasted barley, feeling the difference in texture. It's heavier, oilier, the mash bubbles more slowly. The smell is rich and savory, like bread crust and root vegetables had a delicious baby. You taste a spoonful before fermentation. It's like warm cereal, bready, slightly sweet. Surprisingly good. If you added honey and cinnamon, you'd have something close to breakfast porridge. The abbess oversees the process with care, her fingers resting lightly on the side of the copper pot. She hums something low, melodic, almost like a lullaby. You don't sing to your beer? You joke. She doesn't answer, just smiles faintly. Later in the kitchen, you see a sister measuring out a small vial of herbs. You lean closer. Is that for flavor? She chuckles. No, for wind. Apparently one risk of drinking that much liquid grain is intestinal revolt. Certain herbs, like fennel and caraway, help keep things civil. You note the addition with new respect. You sit outside to cool off, sipping a leftover mug of gray ale. It tastes like a medieval smoothie, heavy but comforting. And in this moment, you realize something quietly profound. The beer isn't meant to get you drunk. It's meant to carry you through fasting, through hunger, through sorrow, through winter, through silence. Fringe fat. Some nunneries recorded daily beer allotments of up to 2 liters per sister. That's nearly a 6-pack by modern standards. But the alcohol content was lower. The purpose was different, less about escape, more about endurance. You wander into the chapel before Vespers, the sunlight painting stripes on the floor. You spot a sister kneeling in prayer, her empty mug beside her. Is that sacrilegious? Apparently not. In fact, some saints are associated directly with beer. Saint Arnold of Metz, Saint Bridget, Saint Cuthbert, who supposedly blessed a brewery by accident and made it produce double. The lines between sacred and sudsy are blurrier than you thought. Even the architecture seems to accommodate brewing life. Beneath the chapel there's a cool stone-lined cell. You descend with Elspeth to help move the casks. It smells like damp grain, thyme, and a hint of apple. Down here the beer rests. Ages, learns its lesson. Just like us, she mutters, setting down You spend the evening helping prep mugs for the incoming pilgrims, travelers who will be allowed to rest in the convent, eat a bit of bread, and drink what the sisters call the mercy brew. It's low in alcohol, high in herbs, gentle, warming. You sip a cup before bed. It tastes like thyme, lemon balm, and kindness. The stars are out when you return to your cot. The night is still. You hear the soft creak of barrels below, settling into silence. You think of the phrase etched into the chapel door. Ora et labora, pray and work. And here you realize, brew counts as both. You're scrubbing copper kettles at dawn, and it's surprisingly loud work for such a quiet convent. The brewing room smells like scorched grain and lavender soap, an oddly pleasant mix, and your fingers are pruned from rinsing barrels in near-freezing well water. Sister Agnes hands you a long-handled brush and points to a vat with residue that looks suspiciously like burnt oatmeal. Don't stop until it stops fighting you, she says, and disappears into a cloud of steam. You thought today would be a break, maybe some chanting, a little garden work, but no, it's cleaning day. The nuns call it the rule of return. Everything brewed must be accounted for, and every mistake must be scrubbed into humility. And so you scrub, and while you scrub, you notice a book. It's on a shelf by the hearth, half burned on the edges, bound in worn leather, and nearly camouflaged against the wall. You can't resist. With hands still damp, you flip it open. Inside the convent's brewing manual. Well, sort of. It's less a manual and more a tapestry of scribbled notes, little recipes, half-spells, observations, and prayers. In between barley ratios and boiling times, there are doodles of saints, mystical symbols, and at least one sketch of a pig wearing a halo. Sister Elspeth sees you reading. Don't trust everything in there, she warns. Sister Theophia liked to embellish. You laugh, then pause. There are rules in here you don't recognize. One entry reads, barley must be turned with the left hand on feast days, lest it offend Saint Kevin. Another warns, if the brew is too bitter, blame the moon, not the malt. A third simply reads, do not whisper secrets near open fermentation. Are these real? Historians still debate how much monastic brewing followed codified practices versus regional folklore. But in this book, everything is sacred, even the superstitions. Elspeth points to one margin note. Never brew during eclipse. She leans in. That one's real. Sister Clement got sick after ignoring it. We still don't know if it was the yeast or the star. You return to scrubbing, now watching the shadows a little more closely. Once the kettles shine, and the barrels gleam, the abbess calls you to the scriptorium. There, the older sisters are copying the recipe from the week's best batch onto parchment scroll. It's oddly precise. 1 bushel barley cracked, not crushed. Half-hand hops. Stir clockwise if born under Virgo. You blink. Wait. You include zodiac signs? The abbess gives a slight smirk, only because it makes the batches harder to replicate. That's the game, you realize. Secrecy. Obfuscation. Protecting the brew through layers of ritual superstition and sly sarcasm. You wonder how many monks ever dared decode a convent recipe. You ask about measurements. Elspeth holds up her hands. We measure by feel, weight of the sack, bend of the ladle, time it takes to sing 1.5 psalms. So, no scales. She shrugs. Our beer isn't about numbers, it's about harmony. Quirky tidbit. Some nunneries did use their own measuring systems, often calibrated to the height of a specific sister. 1 Agnes arm might equal a half yard. 3 Elspeth steps might be the distance to stir the hops. It sounds chaotic, but they made it work. You're asked to transcribe one of the recipes, and as you write, you notice another layer to the code. The margins contain tiny notes written in reverse Latin, only legible when held to the light. One says, "If the monks ask, this batch was spoils." That's when you realize, this is a playbook, a brewing grimoire, and a prank manual all in one. Equal parts gospel and gossip. And yet, they follow it, devoutly. Every rule has a reason, even if the reason is a joke passed down for 2. They all go quiet. Then Elspeth says, "Once, Sister Miriam doubled the cloves on St. Bertil's Day. Said she felt bold. And she couldn't stop sneezing for a week. The whole convent stank of stew, not exactly divine retribution, but memorable." The rest of the day, you watch the nuns work with new eyes. They move through the brewing steps with choreography, whispering little phrases under their breath. Not prayers, more like spells. Boil the sting, but leave the bite. Let the foam rise 3 fingers. Then strain before the moon falls. It's poetic, even if it doesn't make logical sense. You begin to understand why the beer here tastes like it's been whispered into flavor rather than just brewed. Later, you carry a fresh barrel into the cool cellar, and notice one marked with an unfamiliar symbol, a spiral encased in a triangle. Elspeth sees you hesitate. "That's Sister Juliana's batch," she says. "She added black pepper and orange peel. The monks hate it, so naturally, we brewed it again." You ask what happened. "Well," she says, "now they pretend not to like it. But they keep asking for samples." You sit on a barrel and sip a sample yourself. It's spicy, bright, unexpected, and oddly modern. It reminds you of the craft IPAs in your neighborhood pub. Except this one's brewed by women who sleep in silence and scrub their kettles with lavender ash. The abbess enters the cellar, brushing dust from her sleeves. She nods toward the spiral barrel. "That one's not for sale." "That one's just for us." You smile. "Sacred?" She smiles back. "Secret." That night, as you crawl into bed, the scent of cloves and toasted barley still clinging to your shirt, you wonder how many of these brewing rules are superstition, and how many are genius disguised as ritual. Either way, the beer tastes better for it. You rise with a sore back and a heavier than usual suspicion. Something's off with the morning beer. At breakfast, the usual tankard sits beside your bowl of mash, but the flavor is flat, less sparkle, more soggy bread than brilliant barley. You glance around the table, and the sisters are doing that polite, silent nod thing people do when something is terrible, but no one wants to say it aloud, except Sister Elspeth. She frowns and mutters, "Tastes like monk's beer." You almost spit your sip. It's not just a jab. There's a story behind that phrase, and today, you're going to live it. The abbess tasks you with an unusual assignment. Escort Sister Agatha to the nearby monastery to collect empty barrels. A diplomatic mission, she calls it. "Wear something clean," she adds, "and try not to start a theological debate." You change into a less stained tunic and join Agatha on the path that curves through the pasture. In the distance, the monastery looms, taller, richer, and much more self-congratulatory in its architecture. High stone arches, stained glass everywhere, and walls so well maintained they practically glitter. It looks like it's trying to win an award for most holy looking. Don't be fooled, Agatha says, nodding toward the bell tower. They've got 3 bells and 0 hops. The monks greet you with the stiff enthusiasm of men who haven't had a visitor since last Advent. Brother Tiberius leads you into their brewhouse, which smells fine, a little musty, more vinegar than it should. You glance at Agatha, and she gives a barely perceptible nose wrinkle. The monk's brewing setup is larger, more elaborate. Rows of heavy barrels, gleaming tools, an actual book of ratios, laid out on a clean table like it's the Gospel of Malt. But as you watch them work, something becomes clear. They treat brewing like math, precise, sterile, and a bit joyless. They scoop grain in exact weight, time their boils with water clocks. Even their stirring is symmetrical. 8 strokes clockwise, 8 counter. You whisper to Agatha, "They're brewing like it's surgery." She nods. No taste in their touch. You sample their ale. It's bland, not bad. Exactly. But soulless, like a beige tunic in liquid form. Historians still argue whether monks' beer was always superior due to their resources, or whether the flavor was compromised by scale. But standing here, watching these solemn men measure down to the grain husk, you start to understand why people used to travel farther for the Nuns Brew. It wasn't just about ingredients, it was about intention. Still, the monks are proud. One gives you a tiny lecture on the gravity readings of their wort. Another boasts about a new fermentation method they learned from a traveling friar. And then, oh no, they hand you a sample of something new, honey ale blessed on St. Anthony's Day. You sip. It tastes like regret and syrupy ambition. Fun fact, some monks experimented with flavored beers to attract new patrons. But without balance, they often went overboard. You're tasting that history now, and it's education. The real kicker comes when Brother Tiberius insists on showing you their bottling process. It involves a contraption with gears and funnels and a ladle on a pulley system. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine had a love child with a soup kitchen. It saves time, he said. Sure, Agatha replies flatly. But does it save the flavor? Tiberius misses the jab. You collect your barrels, half of which still smell like someone rinsed them with weak tea, and start hauling them back down the trail. Agatha carries hers with a kind of disdain, like the cask offended her ancestors. They don't taste as they brew, she mutters. What do you mean? They follow rules, pages, charts, but they never taste as they go. No mouth, no heart. That hits deep. Back at the convent, the contrast is immediate. The brewhouse smells like toasted grain, basil and lemon peel. Sisters are laughing. Someone is singing a hymn that drifts between Latin and something suspiciously close to a drinking song. And the batch bubbling in the kettle smells You tell Elspeth about the monk ale. She winces. Did it taste like damp wool and regret? More like baptized dishwater. She nods solemnly. Yes, the reserve. You all but fall over laughing. And yet, there's a deeper truth hidden in the joke. The nuns have less space, fewer tools, no fancy funnel system. But what they do have is soul, flexibility, flavor. You help rinse out the return barrels with rosemary water to purge the monk funk. Elspeth watches you closely. Now taste this, she says, handing you a new sample. It's floral, crisp, with a citrusy snap and warm caramel undertones. You blink. This is incredible. She grins. No clocks involved. You spend the rest of the day helping revive the next batch, restoring it from monk blandness back to nun brilliance. A little extra ginger here, a touch more malt there. You stir, sip, correct, repeat. By evening, The new batch is sealed and tucked away. The sisters hum as they carry mugs to the refectory. You join them, tankard in hand. To the monks, Elspeth says, raising her mug. To their blessed efforts, Agatha replies. To never brewing like that, you add, and everyone laughs. You sit back, the taste of citrus and malt warming your chest. The monks may have the bells, but the sisters have the flavor. This morning you're on your knees with a brush, scrubbing the inside of a wooden barrel that smells like something died in it during the Crusades. It's cleaning week at the convent, and that means every piece of brewing equipment, from the smallest stirring spoon to the largest fermentation tun, is being purified with holy enthusiasm and herb-scented water. Sister Agnes hands you a fresh bundle of rosemary, bundled tightly with a leather cord. Blessed by Sister Beatrix herself, she says, as if you've just been handed Excalibur. The scent hits you in waves, piney, sharp, almost medicinal. You dip it into a basin of hot water, dunk your rag, and get to work. The barrel gives off a faint whiff of old beer, mingled with something you politely pretend not to identify. Welcome to sanitation, medieval nun style. You thought the nuns were clean before, but this is next level. Every nook and cranny, every valve, every spigot, scrubbed with devotion bordering on obsession. And it's not just about neatness, it's about survival. Historians still debate how conscious medieval brewers were of microbial dangers, given they lacked germ theory. But nunneries, more than most places, seemed to figure out that cleanliness meant fewer funerals. The convent's cleanliness isn't just for show. It's baked into the rule. You don't brew if your hands aren't washed. You don't taste if your tools aren't clean. You don't drink if the barrel hasn't been blessed, or at least sniff-tested by someone with a good nose. By mid-morning your back is aching, and your fingernails are black with ancient gunk. Sister Elspeth appears beside you, holding a pot of vinegar and juniper berries. For rinsing, she says, kills the barrel ghosts. You laugh, then pause. She's not entirely joking. Apparently barrel ghosts are what they call the invisible funk that spoils a good batch. It may not be scientifically accurate, but it's close. The residue of mold, wild yeast, or heaven forbid mouse droppings can turn a heavenly brew into a curse in a cup. The nuns have no microscopes, but they've got noses. And vinegar. Lots of vinegar. You help rinse another barrel. This one's cleaner, but you spot a crack along the seam. Elspeth taps it. This one's close to turning. We'll make vinegar with it before it leaks into a feast batch. Turns out, even when beer goes bad, the sisters find a use for it. Vinegar is valuable, not just for cleaning, but for pickling vegetables, treating wounds, and in some rare cases, administering a very sharp wake-up call to sleepy novices. Fringe tidbit. Vinegar was once used in tonics that nuns prepared for weary pilgrims. Some recipes included garlic, honey, and mustard seed, a medieval precursor to energy drinks. Sour, but effective. You take a short break, sipping water from a ceramic cup. Sister Agatha sits beside you, wiping sweat from her brow with a rag that used to be white. Do the monks clean like this? You ask. She laughs, so hard she snorts. They rinse their tools in cold well water, and call it a baptism. You raise an eyebrow. They once let a barrel go 2 months without scrubbing. When they opened it, the mold had a beard. You're not sure if she's exaggerating, but you'll never forget that image. The abbess appears mid-afternoon to inspect the cellars. Her eyes scan every surface. One finger trails along the inside of a keg. She lifts it, sniffs, and nods. Good. No mildew. No death. Just the breath of barley. Her standards are terrifyingly high. You follow her deeper into the cellar, where cooler air settles. The walls drip with condensation. Wooden casks line the chamber like silent sleeping monks. And yet, they're cleaner than your last hotel stay. You ask why the sisters are so particular. Why not just rinse and repeat? The abbess stops. Her hand rests gently on a barrel. Because one sour cask ruins the choir, she says. And you get it. Brewing here isn't just craft, it's chorus. Everything must be in harmony, Even the containers that hold the holy liquid must be in tune. She gestures for you to follow. You end up in a tiny annex, with a shelf of cleaning tools, stiff bristle brushes, dried herb bundles, soapstones, and something that looks suspiciously like a medieval plunger. Above it hangs a small wooden plaque. Blessed are the pure of keg, for they shall inherit the foam. You snort laughter. Elspeth hears and smiles. You laugh, she says. But tell me, do the monks have anything cleaner than their confessional? Apparently not. Historians still argue whether nunneries were actually more sanitary than male monasteries. But anecdotal records show fewer sickness outbreaks, longer lifespans, and better preserved brewing spaces in several documented convents. And sure, maybe part of it was fewer guests and less rowdy traffic. But part of it, absolute, unrelenting sanitation. By the end of the day, your knees are bruised, your arms are noodles, and your robe smells like vinegar and rosemary. But every cask shines. The brewhouse gleams. Even the cat, Hops, walks more daintily across the now spotless floor. As the evening bell tolls, the sisters gather to bless the room. The abbess reads from a psalm, flicks lavender water across the kettles, and quietly intones, "May what ferments here bring joy, not illness." They chant a final line in Latin. The room grows still, and just like that, the brewing resumes. Grain is measured, water is boiled, and the freshly cleaned barrels wait, open like polished calluses. You sit on a stool, sore and sleepy, but oddly proud. You helped. You fought the mold. You scrubbed away the shadows. Tomorrow, you'll brew again. But tonight, you drink from a mug that smells like rosemary and hard-earned silence. The morning mist clings to the grass like a second skin, and your breath hangs in the cool air as you step back into the brew house. But today, something's different. You smell it before you see it. Sharp, floral, and bitter in a way that grabs the back of your throat and makes your tongue sit up straight. You follow the scent to a table stacked high with green, cone-shaped buds. Hops. Today, says Sister Agnes, we add the heresy. You blink. Heresy? Elspeth appears behind you, already rolling up her sleeves. Depends who you ask. Because today's edition, Humulus lupulus, the humble hop, will change everything. Historians still argue whether the early church welcomed or resisted hops, but convents were among the first places to test them, before the practice became standardized. And here in this convent, that debate isn't theoretical, it's personal. You run your fingers through the mound of hops. They're dry but sticky, like pine cones dipped in citrus oil. The aroma is electric, grassy, resinous, strangely alluring. You rub a bit between your fingers and sniff. Bam! It punches through the nose like a green comet. These aren't herbs, Agatha says. They're discipline. You ask what she means, and she nods to the brewing pot, already bubbling. Hops bring bitterness, she explains. They hold the brew together. They stop it from going wild. They say this is enough. Hops are preservative too. That's why they caught on in large-scale brewing. They let beer survive travel, resist spoilage, and age gracefully, unlike Groot ales, which had a shelf life shorter than a gnat's patience. Hopped beer could last weeks or even months. This changed trade, storage, even taxation. You help toss a scoop into the boiling wort. The scent blooms immediately, less playful than thyme or rosemary. This is serious. Assertive, a nun with her sleeves rolled up and no time for nonsense. Sister Elspeth frowns as the steam rises. It kills the old flavors, she said, the wildness, the dream. And here's the rift, playing out in front of you like a soap opera in burlap. Some of the sisters love hops, the predictability, the bitterness that cuts through sweetness and gives structure. Others, not so much. They miss the herbal complexity, the floral madness, the swirling, shifting taste of yesterday's Groot. You ask the abbess what she thinks. She stares at the pot for a long time. God made hops, she says, but the devil made them convenient. That's the thing. Once hops enter the brewing scene, everything changes. Recipes become standard, flavors become more uniform, beer becomes a product. And the nuns, they feel it. This is the moment when brewing tips from art into industry. You stir the pot, watching hops dance like green confetti. The bitterness spreads fast, biting down into the mash and snapping it into place. Fringe fact, early hopped beers were called bitter ales, and they sparked fierce resistance. In some cities, laws were passed to protect traditional brewt makers. In others, hop use was accused of being foreign, especially Germanic. Xenophobic hop paranoia. Who knew? You ask Elspeth if the nuns ever had to choose sides. We had a schism, she says deadpan. You pause. Serious, not theological, she adds, just flavor. Apparently one summer, a younger nun secretly hopped every batch. She claimed it made the beer last longer during the hot months. The Groot loyalists were furious. Barrels were labeled F for flavored and U for untapped. There were midnight swaps, pranks. One sister poured valerian in the hopped brew to restore its soul. It was called the Great Hops Incident. It lasted 3 weeks. You can't stop laughing, but the tension lingers. Because even now, the decision to hop or not to hop is a spiritual choice. Do you embrace the future consistency, longevity, clarity, or do you preserve the past wildness, mystery, and risk? The batch finishes boiling, and you help strain the hops, now swollen and pale. Their work is done. The flavor remains. Sister Theodora appears with her brewing log. She records the hop weight, boil time, and her impression. Sharp, but holy. You sneak a sip from the cooling bucket. The bitterness hits first, then fades to something warm and almost citrusy. It's clean, crisp, almost modern, and it's good. You glance around at the others. Some sisters sip with frowns, others with curiosity. One nods, slowly, her expression unreadable. Change is brewing, literally. Later over supper, the abbess addresses the elephant in the brew kettle. We'll keep the Groot, she says, and we'll keep the hop. But from now on, each batch will declare its soul. You imagine future barrels etched with the letters G or H, a sacred alphabet of preference. Freedom of flavor, someone murmurs. The abbess raises her mug to bitterness. Where needed, the sisters echo the toast, some more enthusiastically than others. That night, as you lie in bed, you think about how hops turned beer from a living memory into a marketable good, how one small plant brought order to chaos, and how the nuns, these stubborn, brilliant women, refused to let the old ways die entirely. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Somewhere below, the hop bitter batch cools in the stone cellar, slowly becoming what tomorrow will taste like. And beside it, in another barrel, the old Groot sleeps, wilder, softer, waiting to dream again. It's just before dawn when you find Sister Maria already at work, bent over her brewing log by candlelight, muttering to herself and poking at a cluster of clay pots like they've personally wronged her. Her corner of the brew house is nothing like the main room. Here, everything is smaller, stranger, and slightly singed. Tiny clay alembics bubble softly over coals. A rack holds vials with mysterious labels: Warta Third Night Chill, Boil Test 2, No Clove, Yeast, Wild from Apricot Skin. You've stumbled into the convent's research and development department. Grab that spoon, she says without looking up. Not that one, the wood one. Unless you want this batch to taste like tin and despair. You obey, because Sister Maria has the quiet intensity of someone who once prayed an entire plague away, just by glaring at it. She's barely 5 feet tall, wears glasses bound together with wire, and smells faintly of singed sage and ambition. Historians still argue whether nuns truly contributed to the science of fermentation, or just observed its effects. But Maria is proof that some of them were on the edge of discovery centuries before Louis Pasteur named a single germ. You lean over her logbook. It's written in Latin, English, and something you suspect is shorthand or possibly just furious chicken scratch. Each page is filled with dates, temperatures, fermentation times, notes like foam, excessive, possible overpitching, and drawings of microscopic swirls labeled yeast friends. I don't trust them unless I can see them bubble, she mutters, tapping a sealed jar. You glance at a cluster of parchment strips hanging beside her desk. They're stained with liquid, stuck to dried herbs, and annotated with detailed sensory notes, texture, scent, color. She's not just brewing beer, she's studying it. I want to know why, she says. Why one barrel sings, and another turns sour. Why Sister Elspeth's batch from last summer healed a cough, but gave Agnes nosebleed. Why wild yeast tastes like apricot if it's caught at dusk, but like old cabbage if harvested after rain. You stare at her. Sister, you're doing science. She blinks. Don't be absurd. I'm just asking questions the Lord hasn't answered yet. You help her stir a tiny pot of bubbling wort. It smells sweet, then tangy, then slightly burnt. She adds a shaving of bark. You're not sure from which tree. You don't ask. Let it simmer, she says, flipping through a half-singed notebook filled with results from something she calls yeast whispering. Turns out, Sister Maria collects wild yeast strains. She leaves small bowls of wort around the garden overnight, covered in linen, then captures whatever native yeast finds its way in. Some ferment beautifully, others produce smells that make you question the nature of mercy. But she logs every one. Fringe tidbit. There's historical evidence that medieval brewers reused yeast sediment from previous batches, an early form of strain cultivation. But Maria takes it further. She's attempting to isolate the best wild yeast by testing them side by side. She's even named a few. This one's Vincent, she says, pointing to a jar. Reliable, slow starter, but never ruins a batch. And this, she points to another, is Hildegard. Too bubbly, makes a mess. But the flavor, divine. She sighed. They'd make beautiful beer children if I could figure out how to cross them. You're now convinced she's either centuries ahead of her time, or moments away from animating a yeast homunculus. The abbess once jokingly called her the mother of foam. Maria didn't laugh. She just added it to her notebook. By mid-morning, you're helping prepare a three-way fermentation test. Same grain, same water, different yeast. She wants to track how fast they start, how high they foam, and what kind of taste lingers on the tongue an hour later. She's got a chart for everything. It looks like a proto-spreadsheet, complete with symbols for bitter aftertaste, sour funk, and regret. You glance at a sealed clay vessel tucked behind her workbench. What's that one? She frowns. She doesn't elaborate. Later you ask Sister Elspeth if Maria has always been like this. She once tried to brew ale with thistle pollen and honeydew sap, Elspeth says. We told her it smelled like a damp goat. She took that as a compliment. You return to Maria's corner and find her hunched over her bubbling trio of test brews. She offers you a sample 3 tiny sips. The first is bright, crisp, almost lemony. The second is smooth, mellow, a touch herb. The third tastes like it's been fermented with the breath of a cranky dragon. You gag. She nods. Yes, Bernard. The results go into her log. She plans to revisit them next month. Possibly with a new infusion. Possibly with fewer drag. You sit beside her as she scribbles into the afternoon, watching her balance intuition with observation. It's brewing, yes, but also chemistry, biology, a kind of holy curiosity that bubbles just below the surface. What would you do, you ask, if the monks ever asked for your note? She doesn't look up, lose them. Later in the chapel, you spot her notebook tucked beside her prayer book, as if fermentation and faith were equal in holiness. And maybe for Sister Maria they... The morning arrives, foggy, dense, and quiet in a way that makes everything feel like it's waiting for something or someone. You step outside, stretching your sore shoulders, and notice the bell rope twitching gently in the breeze. Down the road, figures move slowly, hunched under cloaks and burdened by satchels. Pilgrims. They arrive in clumps, shoes caked in mud, eyes rimmed with dust and fatigue. Some are coughing, others limp. A few carry icons tied with string and hope, and what they want, more than shelter or prayer, is beer. But not for the reason you'd think. You're assigned to help serve the day's mercy brew, a mild ale brewed with chamomile, lemon balm, and a trace of mint. Low in alcohol, high in kindness. Sister Elspeth calls it a hug in a mug. You ladle the warm brew into wooden cups as the first wave of pilgrims arrives at the cloister. One woman sips and immediately exhales like she's just dropped her burdens for the first time in miles. "It's clean," she whispers, almost in disbelief. Because out there, nothing is clean. The roads are disease-ridden. Rivers carry more filth than fish, and towns crowded and chaotic brew ale that's often infected with wild yeast, or worse, thinned with swamp water and lies. But here, behind the stone walls and the rosemary-scrubbed kettles, the beer is safe. Historians still argue whether monastic beer actually helped reduce illness, or if the perception of purity simply came from the monastic reputation. But you don't need a footnote to see the effect it has today. The pilgrims drink deeply, slowly, gratefully, and you're not surprised to learn that during times of plague, this convent brewed more than just their usual batches. They crafted special brews, antiseptic, restorative, made with ginger and horehound, recipes passed down, adjusted with every season of sorrow. Sister Maria appears mid-morning with a basket of herbs. "Extra hyssop," she mutters. "For the coughers." You glance across the courtyard. She's not wrong. A soft chorus of throat-clearing punctuates the morning prayer. One particularly pale pilgrim sits beneath a tree, shivering slightly even in the sun. You hand him a cup and notice a rash creeping up his neck. A nun appears with a cloth soaked in beer and vinegar and dabs it gently against his wrist. He winces, then breathes easier. "That's batch 12, she says almost proudly. You blink. "We use beer for wound care. Only the antiseptic kind," she replies. "The sour ones. They sting like sin but work like penance." There's a quiet industry to the sisters now, more methodical, more vigilant. The usual smiles are gentler, thinner. There's always a shadow that walks with the pilgrims. You can feel it pressing in around the edges of the convent. Not just hunger, but illness. Rumors of plague. A town to the north, emptied overnight. A family that didn't arrive when expected. And suddenly, the beer is more than just a drink again. It's a line between safety and sickness, between breath and stillness. You remember a story the abbess told you in passing. During a terrible outbreak decades ago, they closed the gates for a month. No one in, no one out, but they passed jugs of ale over the wall, tied with cloth, left in ditches, marked with chalk crosses. People swore the beer itself kept them alive. Fringe tidbit: some scholars believe the low pH and alcohol content in monastic beer did in fact inhibit bacterial growth. Not enough to cure disease, but enough to make a difference, especially compared to contaminated water. Sister Elspeth leans in and whispers, "When the monks tried to brew a plague beer, they added cloves and wormwood, tasted like soap and regret." You stifle a laugh, even though your heart's a little heavy. At lunch, the abbess orders an extra batch brewed for the road-weary. It's to be blessed, bottled, and handed out to departing pilgrims, with small packets of dried herbs. You help label the bottles, Benedictus, for journey and joy. It smells like thyme, orange peel, and something spicy you can't name. By evening, the last pilgrims settle into sleep, huddled in the guest house, or curled against warm stone walls. The sisters sit by the fire, sipping mugs of the same brew. You watch Sister Maria add a pinch of dried feverfew to her cup, and stir it with a sprig of mint. She sees your look and shrugs. "For dreaming," she says. Later, as you sweep the empty cloister walk, you see a wooden cup still half full beside a sleeping boy's bedroll. He's curled around it like a talisman. You lean close and sniff. Mint, lemon, A trace of malt. You don't touch it. Something about it feels like it's working. As the bell tolls compline, the convent slips into silence. Outside, the fog has returned, but inside, the brewing room still smells like warmth, and the barrels breathe gently in the cool cellar air. They're not just brewing beer, they're brewing sanctuary. There's a clatter in the courtyard, just after sunrise. The unmistakable sound of hooves, wooden wheels, and the overly practiced tone of someone rich, announcing their presence. You peer through the archway and spot a small retinue of horses, a cart draped in crimson cloth, and a woman dismounting with the kind of ease that says she hasn't carried her own shoes in years. A noble woman, maybe a duchess, maybe just an enthusiastic baroness with excellent posture. Behind her, footmen unload a crate stamped with a wax seal shaped like a lion licking a goblet. Sister Elspeth nudges you. Brace yourself. It's Baroness de Vaux. She's here for her beer. Apparently, she's a regular. You follow the sisters as they greet the Baroness with a mixture of politeness and restrained exhaustion. She kisses the abbess's hand, then immediately asks whether the feast brew is as lively as last spring's batch, with the pepper finish. The abbess replies, "This year it sings with cinnamon and restraint." The Baroness squeals. Over the next hour, she tastes, she samples, she takes notes on a little scroll. She's not just a patron, she's a crit. And today, she's in love with the convent's healing ale. A batch made with horehound, honey, and a rare citrus peel the nuns barter for, from traveling friars. It's warming, earthy, and smells like late summer evenings in a herb garden. "I shall take 4 casks," she declares, "and 1 more, for my hound. He's had terrible digestion since Candlemas." Historians still debate how wide-reaching these noble convent beer relationships truly were. But this baroness clearly treats the abbey like a private brewery, with spiritual overtone, and she pays well in wax, bolts of fabric, dried saffron, and even rare parchment. It's not coin, but it's currency. You help Sister Agatha stack the requested casks on the Baroness's cart. They're labeled with little ink sigils, stars, moons, herbs, each indicating a specific blend. One is marked with a symbol you've never seen before. "That's for her cousin," Agatha says. "She likes it bitter. No sweet herbs, more hops than soul." You can't help but wonder what the monks would say if they saw this whole operation. And then, as if summoned by irony, one of the footmen mutters, "Monastery brew tastes like boiled sandal." You try not to laugh. The sisters don't bother hiding theirs. Later, once the Baroness has departed in a swirl of perfume and entitlement, the nuns sit to debrief. "She drank 7 cups," Elspeth says, "and claimed each one changed her chia," adds Maria, rolling her eyes. But they're not annoyed, not really. The Baroness funds 1/3 of the convent's parchment supply. Her eccentric love of herbal brews keeps Sister Maria's experiments well stocked, and her noble gossip, as dramatic as it is ridiculous, gives the sisters a peek into a world they rarely touch. "We once brewed a beer for a wedding," Agnes tells you. "The bride requested rose hips and tears of longing." "Tears of longing?" you ask. "We used salted water." "Close enough." Fringe tidbit: some nunneries did indeed brew specialty batches for major noble events. Births, weddings, death. Recipes would be tailored not just to taste, but to symbolism. Dark grains for mourning, pale ales for rebirth, ale as metaphor. This becomes clearer when the abbess shows you the ledger. Yes, they have one. Handwritten entries, carefully logged dates, patrons' batches, ingredients, deliveries. Next to each name is a note, like "prefers bitter, dislikes anise," or "add mint, improves husband's breath." You raise an eyebrow. The abbess shrugs. "We brew for bodies, not just bellies." But it's not all fun and nobles. One batch, batch 41, is marked "Perfume." You ask why. Elspeth frowns. A monk came with an order, wanted 100 liters for a bishop's feast. And we brewed it. He complained it was too herbal, said it was improper for masculine celebration. You pause. Did he pay? No, she said, but he got a barrel anyway, mixed with gooseberry vinegar. Ouch. The afternoon fades into warm amber light. You help carry empty barrels back into the cellar. One has a wax seal broken, its contents barely touched. Rogue batch, Agatha says. We tried smoked malt, too bold. You taste a sip. It's strange. Campfire and caramel. Not bad, just ahead of its time. Some recipes live short lives. The abbess appears as the sun dips below the hills. She lifts a small tankard. To the patrons, may their palates remain adventurous and their dogs less gassy. The sisters laugh, toast, and sip the latest success, a mild fizzy herb ale with just enough ginger to warm the chest. You sit in the corner, cup in hand, listening to them talk about beer, about noble scandals, about a baroness who once asked if she could baptize her roses in convent ale. Apparently the abbess said yes. That night, as the moon rises and the convent returns to silence, you pass through the cellar one last time. Among the rows of casks, one glows faintly in the moonlight. Its sigil is unfamiliar. You don't open it, but you swear you catch a whiff of rose and longing. You wake to the distant sound of chanting and the sharper sound of someone, somewhere, loudly dropping a full crate of mugs. It's inspection day. Or at least that's what Sister Elspeth calls it, with a tone that makes it sound more like Judgment Day's awkward cousin. The nuns are bustling, scrubbing walls that are already spots, adjusting barrels by millimeters, and brushing invisible dust from the altar cloths. Even the cat has been forcibly bathed. Why? Because a bishop is visiting, and bishops bring attention. Attention, in turn, brings rules, and rules do not mix well with fermented creativity. Don't say anything about the feast brew, Agatha whispers, stuffing a bottle into a cupboard. And for heaven's sake, don't let him near Maria. You glance at Maria's workshop, where she's currently attempting to cold ferment a batch using snow and owl feathers. Probably best the bishop doesn't know that. By late morning, the bishop arrives, flanked by 2 squires and one rather apologetic monk, who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. The bishop's robes are purple, his eyebrows are judgmental, and his expression says, "I suspect you've enjoyed yourselves, and I disapprove." The abbess greets him with a bow, so precise it could slice cheese. "Welcome to our humble house," she says. "May your spirit be nourished, and your cup never empty." He nods, eyes already scanning the courtyard. You're tasked with serving lunch, and of course, a single mug of the convent's plainest ale. A safe ale. Low herb, low hop, low fun. Historians still debate whether the church officially monitored monastic brewing practices, or simply turned a blind eye. But today, you're seeing firsthand how politics and piety do an awkward dance around a barrel. You serve the bishop, he sips, and he frowns. "This is quite mild. It is Lent," the abbess says smoothly. He sniffs the cup, as if hoping to catch a whiff of scandal. "It is adequate." You internally translate that to, "I was hoping for sin." Still, he doesn't press. Not openly. But then he starts wandering. Through the scriptorium, past the herb garden, toward the cellar. Sister Agnes intercepts him with alarming speed, and offers a tour of the chapel frescoes. You think she threw in a Latin hymn, just to slow him down. Meanwhile, Sister Elspeth pulls you aside. "We're going to need plausible deniability," she whispers. You blink. For what? She gestures behind her. Sister Maria is bottling her latest healing batch, which includes cardamom, honey, hops, and something she won't name out loud. It's intended for a pregnant noblewoman with back pain and a fondness for spice. "It's too strong to be medicine," Elspeth murmurs, "but too mild to be sin." The bishop would panic. You help relabel the bottles. Infusion for pilgrim resilience. Perfectly vague, slightly pious. Later, in the brew house, you notice the sisters have swapped the barrel labels to more neutral names. Festive ale becomes seasonal tonic. Jubilant brew becomes monastic herbal solution. Even Witch's Wink gets relabeled now simply. You ask why they go through this effort. The abbess replies without looking up. Because so long as they don't ask, we're not lying. You realize then, the church knows. Or rather it chooses not to know. The bishops drink the ale. The monks sometimes trade for it. The nobles sing its praises. But no one wants to officially recognize that a group of women in an herb-scented cloister is outbrewing the entire monastic order. Fringe tidbit. In some convents, bishops issued gentle recommendations that brewing be restricted to feast days. These suggestions were usually met with nods, smiles, and completely ignored barrels. The day passes with polite tension. The bishop inspects everything. Except, miraculously, Maria's corner. When he finally departs, his parting words are vague. Your order seems industrious. The abbess bows again. We serve with full hands and open hearts. He rides away, and the convent exhales. That night, the sisters gather in the brew house for the real tasting. A small cask of the resilience infusion is opened. You sip. It's fiery, herbal, just sweet enough. It warms your chest like a whispered prayer dipped in cinnamon. They laugh freely again. Even Maria loosens her hair to surviving inspection. Elspeth toasts. To plausible deniability, Agnes adds. To the bishop, someone mutters. Who left too soon to try the good stuff. The abbess raises her cup. To the fine art of being overlooked. You drink deeply, and it tastes like freedom. You wake to silence. No chanted prayers. No clatter of barrels. No smells of barley or rosemary. Just the soft rustle of wind through shutters and the absence of sound. Where once there had been song. You sit up. Something's wrong. The courtyard is empty. The brew house doors are closed. The herb garden, once buzzing with bees and sisterly muttering, stands still. You wander through the cloister walk and find Elspeth sitting on a bench, staring at her empty hands. They came at dawn, she says. You ask, who? The bishop's men, the new ones. Not like before, not polite. A silence settles between you like a snowfall. They came with parchment and seals, with torches, not flaming, but symbolic, and with words like reform, consolidation, and propriety. The Reformation has arrived. You don't need a scroll to tell you what that means. You see it in the abbess's face, drawn and tired. You see it in the way Sister Maria clutches her notebooks like a lifeline. You see it in the brew house, now stripped of herbs, with barrels already emptied for review. Some say brewing distracts from devotion, Elspeth says bitterly. Others say it smells too much like freedom. Historians still argue whether the crackdown on nun-run breweries was about theology, economics, or simple sexism. But here, it's clear enough. The sisters' beer made them independent, respected, useful, and to some, that made them dangerous. We're to cease all brewing by month's end. The abbess says quietly, standing before the sisters in the chapel. We are to focus on appropriate disciplines, sewing, healing, prayer. You all know what that really means. Silence. Subservient. No more batches labeled with moons or saints, or winks. No more barrels humming in the dark, watched by cats, and stirred with laughter. No more experimentation. No more joy in mugs. You help empty the cellar. One by one, the barrels are drained, tipped, or worse, taken. The monks come to assist. You try not to throw a bucket at them. They wear apologetic smiles and carry scrolls that make your stomach twist. Sister Agnes refuses to cry. Sister Theodora doesn't speak at all. Maria glares at everyone and quietly scribbles new formulas in the margins of an old prayer book. Fringe tidbit. In several recorded cases, nunneries that brewed exceptional ale were shut down, only for the recipes to mysteriously reappear in nearby monasteries. Rebranded, reclaimed, the credit vanished with the steam. You taste the last of the feast brew, before it's siphoned into a monk's wagon. It still sings, clove and citrus, and something wild beneath it all. You wonder if they'll ruin it. You know they. That night, the sisters gather one final time in the brew house. Candles flicker. The air smells faintly of elderflower and memory. The last keg stands in the middle of the room, untouched. You drink slowly, reverently. The abbess doesn't toast. She just watches each sister take her cup. No one speaks, but the silence is full of recipes memorized, of herbs dried and hidden, of knowledge pressed into coded prayers. Because though the brewhouse may fall quiet, the sisters are not erased. They're just going underground. Where will it go? You ask Elspeth, as she wipes the last mug. Into gardens, into teacups, into memory. She smiles faintly. Maybe into that abbey down the road where the abbot thinks we never brewed at all. Maria hands you a sealed parchment before slipping away into the shadow. Open it in 20 years, she says. Or sooner, if you find good yeast and bad company. You sit on the cloister bench as the stars blink into view. Somewhere, a pilgrim might still taste the echo of the mercy brew. A baroness may nurse a headache and wonder why her new batch tastes flat. A monk may boast of a citrusy finish he can't explain. But you'll know. You were here. You stirred the mash. You tasted the dream. You saw the quiet revolution that lived in casks, and cups, and laughter, laced with lavender. And even if the brew house doors are bolted, you'll carry the recipe. Years pass. Not all at once, but in the slow, creeping way that history likes to shift when no one's looking. Roads widen, walls crumble, names fade from ledgers, and somewhere between the last batch and your return, the convent becomes something quieter. You arrive on foot, walking a path now overgrown with moss. The bell tower still leans, ivy still curls around its base, but the air smells different. More dust than yeast, more memory than malt. The brewhouse doors are ajar. Inside, barrels have long since been moved or rotted, but the stone hearth remains. A few old tools hang on the wall, relics rather than instruments. You run your hand along a bench you once scrubbed, once sang beside, and a cloud of dust rises like a ghost, stretching its limbs. No one brews here anymore. Or so it seems. You follow a scent, not strong, just a whisper. Something herbal, with a bitter edge, in the far corner, behind a curtain of cobwebs, and tucked beneath a loose floor tile. You find it, a single bottle. The wax is cracked, the label faded, but legible, Hildegard's Echo. You remember that name. Sister Maria's last experiment. Her gift to the future. You sit, wipe the bottle, and open it slowly. The pop is quiet, the smell immediate, aged citrus, dried thyme, and something darker, something that waited. You pour it into a chipped mug from the shelf, still intact, still stained with memory. The taste is warm, layered, deep, not quite beer, not quite tea, but all the things you thought had been lost. It carries notes of rebellion, a hint of wit, a ghost of Elspeth's smile. Historians still argue whether any of the nun brewed recipes survived. Some say they were absorbed into monk traditions. Others believe they live on in the spice-forward ales of certain German towns. But now, sipping this, you know the truth. They didn't vanish. They simply went quiet, because brewing was never just in the barrels. It was in the soil, in the gardens where mint and marjoram still grow wild, in the prayer books with curious stains, in the way one nun might have whispered a recipe to her niece before taking her vows. You step outside into the sunlight. The herb garden is overgrown, but not dead. Lavender still pushes through the weeds. Rosemary survives in the corner, and you swear for a moment. You hear humming. You follow it to the chapel. It's empty. Dust dances in the light. But carved into the pew near the back is a message, scratched by hand. Small, almost shy, She brews in us still, and you sit, not to pray exactly, but to remember. You pull out Maria's parchment, now creased, weathered, sacred. You unfold it gently. The handwriting is wild, slanted, unmistakable. Recipe 43. Only for when you're ready. Ingredients: 1 handful rebellion, 1 cracked laugh, 1 secret herb. You'll know it. Barley, warm water, patience. Brew beneath stars. Whisper to the foam. Sip with someone worthy. You breathe it in. You're ready. You leave with the parchment, a few cuttings from the garden, and the final drops of Hildegard's echo in your pocket flask. The road home is long, but it smells like time and hope. Because somewhere, maybe in a hidden courtyard, maybe in a modern kitchen, someone will brew again. Maybe not exactly the same, maybe with grapefruit peel and stainless steel, but the echo will be there. The sisters brewed better, not because they had more, but because they brewed for healing, for laughter, for flavor, for life. And you find yourself walking slower. The path beneath your feet softens, the stones fading into moss, the air cooling into velvet. The sky stretches wide above you, painted with stars that hum softly in their distance. The last notes of the sisters' laughter echo gently in your ears, faded, warm, and unhurried. You carry no barrels now, no task in your hands, only memory, only breath. With each step, the weight of the day lightens. The scent of rosemary and thyme lingers at your side, a reminder of work done with love. And somewhere deep in your chest, something still bubbles, something light and slow and bright. The world turns gently. You lie down now on a patch of soft earth, where the grasses sway just enough to keep rhythm with your breathing. You close your eyes. You feel the hum of fermentation in the quiet spaces of your mind. Slow, alive, waiting all around you. The world simmers, not with noise or urgency, but with quiet change, like yeast resting in the dark, transforming something simple into something full of life. You are warm, you are safe. And the nuns, those bold, brewing, barefoot women, whisper their thanks. Their story rests with you now. Let it bubble in dreams. Let it settle. Let it sleep.